The whistle of the train tore through the dry, dusty air of the Arizona plains, and the wooden platform groaned under the footsteps of weary travelers. Among them, she stepped off with a stiff, careful posture, her delicate hands clutching the edges of a worn trunk. Her eyes darted nervously at the crowd, mostly rugged men in dusty boots and wide-brimmed hats, but it was a smile that caught the first man's attention. He laughed, loud and cruel, a sound that echoed across the empty rails. "What's this? A doll lost in the desert?" he jeered, shaking his head. She flinched, shrinking into herself, the weight of loneliness pressing down like a storm on a dry prairie. The Chinese Virgin, as townsfolk whispered, had come from far across the ocean, a bride shipped to the West under promises that had never materialized. The rumors had preceded her, the lies told by brokers, the greed of men who wanted her only as a trophy, nothing more. But her eyes, dark and unyielding, betrayed a fire no man could snuff out. The man's laughter faltered when a shadow fell across him. A lone figure emerged from the edge of the platform, a tall rancher with the kind of presence that silenced the world. Dust clung to his coat, the brim of his hat pulled low over piercing eyes. The townsfolk had whispered about him too, Noah Kane, the man who tamed wild horses and wilder men, who kept his heart locked away after tragedy had claimed his family. He didn't speak at first, only stared, and the laughter died in the first man's throat like smoke. "You all right, miss?" Kane's voice was low, calm, but each word carried authority. She nodded, barely able to meet his gaze, but something inside her stirred, a spark of hope she hadn't felt since leaving her homeland. Kane didn't offer her a hand, didn't make small talk. He merely turned and walked toward the edge of town, and she realized he was inviting her to follow, a silent promise that safety existed in his shadow. Days turned into weeks as she learned the rhythm of the ranch. Horses stamped their hooves, cattle lowed across the endless prairie, and the wind whispered secrets only those who dared listen could understand. Kane was a man of few words, but every glance, every action, spoke volumes. He was rough where the world demanded strength, but tender where most hearts had hardened. Her presence was a puzzle at first, so different from the women he had known, so quiet, so observant, but slowly, his walls began to crumble, each stone loosened by shared labor, shared silences, shared stolen smiles at sunrise. One night, lightning split the sky and rain hammered the tin roof of the barn. She had been tending to a frightened colt when Kane appeared, drenched, his coat clinging to his broad shoulders. "Come inside," he said, though he didn't need to. The storm was fierce, but the way he stood there, offering her protection, made her pulse hammer. That night, by candlelight, he told her about his past, about the fire that had taken his family, about the hollow emptiness that had made him a ghost among men. She listened, and for the first time, he didn't hide his heart. Rumors began to swirl in town. Men whispered about the Chinese Virgin and the lone rancher, skeptical that such a bond could form in a land so unforgiving. One night, a group of drifters decided to test the stories. They crept onto the ranch under cover of darkness, knives glinting, intent on frightening her, maybe worse. But Kane was waiting. The fight was brutal, shadows dancing in the flicker of lanterns, fists and boots colliding with wood and dirt. She watched, paralyzed with fear, as he moved like a storm incarnate, protecting her with everything he had. When it was over, the drifters fled, bloodied and broken, and Kane's chest heaved with exhaustion, but his eyes met hers, and she saw in them a truth no one else had ever offered: he would give his life for her without hesitation. The days that followed brought tension in subtle ways. Townsfolk still stared, judging, mocking, but Kane no longer flinched. And she, once timid, began to walk taller, her hands steady, her eyes bright with determination. They worked the land together, planting crops, mending fences, riding horses across the golden plains. Each day was a dance of trust, each glance a whispered confession of hearts entwined. One evening, as the sun dipped behind distant mesas and the sky bled orange and violet, a telegram arrived. It was from the brokers who had sold her, demanding she return, threatening lawsuits and ruin. Panic fluttered in her chest, but Cain only took her hand, holding it firmly. "No one will take you from here," he said. His voice was steel and silk intertwined. "Not now. Not ever." The following days were a storm of legal threats, hired guns, and mounting danger. Men rode into town, claiming authority, intent on dragging her back east. But the ranch was a fortress, and Cain had prepared for this. Traps were laid, allies gathered, and when the confrontation came, the night exploded with gunfire and chaos. She huddled behind a hay bale, heart pounding, when Cain emerged from the shadows, pistol blazing, deflecting bullets and guiding her to safety. When the smoke cleared, the men had vanished, but the message was clear: no one defied Cain on his land. It was in that aftermath, under a sky littered with stars, that she realized the depth of her feelings. Fear and gratitude had fused into something far stronger, a love that defied borders, prejudice, and pain. Cain, quiet and weathered, finally let his guard down completely. He pulled her close, voice trembling for the first time. "I've waited a lifetime for someone like you," he confessed. "And now, I'm not letting you go." Their bond became the stuff of legend. Stories spread across the west of the Chinese virgin who had captured the heart of the fiercest rancher in Arizona. But no tale could capture the private moments, the laughter shared over a stubborn horse, the quiet mornings watching the sun rise behind endless plains, the hands clasped in the dark as they listened to the wind. Each moment was a victory over a world that had tried to break them. Years later, the ranch thrived, as did their love. She bore him children, and the legacy of their union was more than land or livestock. It was resilience, defiance, and the triumph of hearts that refused to bow. Travelers would occasionally stop at the edge of the ranch, marveling at the story, some skeptical, some in awe. But Cain and his bride, once laughed at and doubted, only smiled, hands entwined, hearts unbreakable, proof that even in the harshest West, love could carve out a place of its own. And the memory of that first laugh, the cruel, mocking sound, faded into legend. The townsfolk who once sneered now whispered her name with reverence, knowing the girl who stepped off the train had transformed a lonely rancher's heart, tamed the wild, and claimed a life she had been denied. In the end, it wasn't the train that carried her, it was love, raw and unyielding, that delivered her to her destiny.